This is your comprehensive guide to combat in Love and Deepspace. Yes, you can beat fights with no 5-star memories, you can defeat enemies even if you're 10 levels below the recommended level, and you can be the badass hunter you were always meant to be. I think a lot of us are like,
why is there combat in my dating sim?
it is a bit unusual for dating games, so I've aimed to make this as beginner friendly and as free to play friendly as possible. This video is going to be focused on general combat mechanics, building your loadouts, and enemy encounters. I'll tell you exactly which weapon and which companion to take and when, the order of skills to maximize damage, plus some additional tips and tricks. My recommendations are based on what I've found to be the most effective so far. To minimize variables and for ease of presentation, I'll also be using the default base cooldowns before any additional modifiers. And lastly, I also highly recommend that you play Love and Deepspace on an emulator on PC because it will allow you to set up your own keybinds, making the combat much easier, especially if you have an MMO mouse. Before getting into actual combat, I'd like to go over the combat screen first because I do have a few callouts that the game doesn't specifically tell you or indicate very clearly. Starting from left to right in the upper left-hand corner is the countdown timer. Pretty straightforward. You have to complete the objective before the time runs out or you'll be defeated. Note that some encounters start the timer right when you load in, others have a tooltip pop-up that you have to dismiss before the time begins. In the bottom left-hand corner is your directional pad, which controls which direction your character moves. Not your camera, your character. To pan your camera, you have to swipe on the right side of the screen. Bottom middle is your green hit points bar. If this gets depleted before you complete the objective from taking too much damage, you'll fail the battle. Directly above your HP bar is your buff bar. It's really small, but the purpose of this is to indicate what active modifiers, such as buffs, debuffs, or stack counters, are on you. For example, when using Savior Deepspace Hunter, he provides Shattered Star as a passive, which increases your crit rate by 7%. This is why you see this green arrow here that persists throughout the entire fight. Directly below your HP bar are 3 stars. These are your charges, and you begin each encounter with a full 3. Using your active skill and your resonance skill consumes these charges. Once consumed, the baseline recharge is 8 seconds per star. Now in the bottom right-hand corner are your action keys. The biggest one is your basic attack. You have to keep tapping this in quick succession to complete your basic attack chain, which is called a combo in this game. If you hold down this key, you can execute a charged attack, which is stronger than a standard basic attack, but takes a little while longer to trigger. This button with the running man is your dodge button. You can dodge up to 3 times in quick succession before a very short cooldown of 1 second. Next is your active skill. This costs 1 star charge to use and it has a cooldown of 7 to 10 seconds depending on your weapon. It does more damage than a basic attack and can interrupt enemies with no protocore shields. Generally speaking, you should only be using this skill during burst phases, which I'll get into later. Last in this cluster of icons is your resonance skill, which costs 2 star charges to use with a base cooldown of 15 seconds. The only exception to this is Dawnbreaker Zane, whose resonance skill has a cooldown of 20 seconds. This skill does more damage than your active skill, can interrupt enemies both with or without protocores, and can break their protocore shields. On the very right edge is your companion's support skill, which varies depending on your chosen partner and their skin. The cooldown also ranges from 10 to 15 seconds depending on the companion. You begin each encounter with this ready to be used. To use the basic version, just tap it once. There is also an empowered version of this support skill which requires you to complete a perfect dodge first. You can accomplish this by standing within range of an enemy's attack, waiting to hear this sound, coupled with the visual indicator of a bright red line flash on your screen, and then dodging. Or in the case of an AoE, just stand in the field and wait until it's almost about to land and then dodge. If you did this correctly, this button will flash repeatedly, allowing you to unleash the empowered support skill. Note this is only available to use within 5 seconds of your perfect dodge. If you don't use it in time, the empower goes away and you'll have to complete another perfect dodge before you can trigger empower. If the support skill is on cooldown and you complete a perfect dodge, it will also refresh the skill's cooldown and you'll be able to use the empowered version right away. Other things to know about this, enemies do swap targets and can switch between you and your companion. Especially if you're not constantly attacking the wanderers or just don't hit them all, they will aggro onto your companion only. Oh, and remember your HP and buff bar? He has these too, except his buffs are indicated on the right of his portrait. You don't really have to worry about their safety for the most part, unless your loadout is severely underleveled. Now this button is your Ardent Oath. This is essentially your ultimate, your dynamic duo skill, where you and your companion tag team to unleash a big attack together. This is different for every companion, but you can recognize it by its flowery CGI animations. This skill can only be used once the button gauge is full. It starts off empty at the beginning of a battle and slowly increases throughout the fight, even when you're not attacking. In a lot of early encounters, you'll only get to use this once, but in longer fights, there will be enough time to use it again. Also, certain skills and protocors with an Oath recovery stat can also speed up the recharge rate. I also want to note that if you look at the tooltip descriptions for the Ardent Oath skill under each companion skin, there's some additional flavor text. For example, the Raphael artist's Ardent Oath states, he wants to show you the beautiful colors of this world and light an everlasting flame for you. If that's not romantic, I don't know what is. Now getting to enemies, before you enter a fight, tap the magnifying glass to take a look at which wanderers you'll be up against and check if there will be any fluctuation warnings, which are essentially enemy buffs you should be aware of. They usually have to do with more damage under certain conditions, so if you're on point with your dodges and positioning, these are largely irrelevant, but still good to be aware of. Now let's take a look at the enemy combat interface. Your current target is indicated by an orange colored radial circle and when they are attackable. I have to say the targeting in this game is not my favorite. You switch targets by swiping on your directional pad, but this can get wonky if there are multiple enemies on the field clustered together. Some enemies will have protocore shields as indicated by these colored circles called stalactrums. There are 6 different types: amber, emerald, pearl, which is pink not white, ruby, sapphire, and violet. So far, enemies will have up to 2 color combinations of stalactrums for their shields. This significantly reduces the damage they take, so you gotta chip these out before unloading your big skills. Every resonance skill can chip off 1 protocore by default, but you can have it break 2 instead of 1 by completely matching the color and number of stalactrums on your memories. Upon breaking all the protocore shields, you interrupt the enemy if they were in the middle of a skill, and they will become susceptible to more damage. This is their weakness window and your burst window, where you want to do as much damage as possible. This period lasts for 10 seconds and is also visually indicated by a blue bar below their HP, which gradually decreases to show how much time is left in their weakness window. Enemy attacks are also indicated in a few different ways. Most common attacks, especially melee ones, will play a scintillating sound cue and flash a red line right before the attack happens. This is when you should dodge to trigger the empowered version of your companion's support skill. For AoEs, the most obvious is a red field. This can be a straight path or a wide circle or an expanding red circle. You typically have a couple of seconds to get out before the attack happens. Dodges are great for this. You can even just run out of some of them. Not all attacks are indicated by red though. Some feels like these lightning ones are white, and big bosses like this worm have bigger attacks like a tail slam and a whirl that hits you multiple times. In these cases, we just gotta follow Dr. Zane's advice. Don't rush. Pay attention. See what the enemy's attacks are so you know what to avoid. Additionally, not all enemies are attackable throughout the entire duration of the fight. For example, some have a starting animation where they have to fly down and land on the ground before they're attackable. Sometimes the enemies will also fly up into the air or crawl underground. Sometimes enemies go into a protected state, in which case this lock appears. You cannot strip their protocore shields during this period. So do not use your active skill, resonance skill, nor ardent oath during this window. So far, I have seen 7 primary types of encounters. Battles can consist of just one of these or a combination. First is defeat all the wanderers single target, meaning there is only one boss throughout the entire encounter, or only ever one on the field at any given time. This is the most straightforward encounter. Just maximize your single target DPS, so claymore, sword, and firearm are all viable. Next is defeat all the wanderers multiple targets edition. This is where you have to eliminate groups of like 2 to 8 wanderers at a time, and there may be multiple waves where after you defeat one wave, the next group of mobs spawn. For 2 to 3, claymore is good because of its damage, but if there are 4 or more, wand edges it out in my opinion because it has ranged AoE. It can be overwhelming dodging attacks from multiple directions in close quarters when using a melee weapon, so unless you're very on point with your dodges and positioning, it's likely easier to go long range. Also, claymore has a knockback on its attacks, so you can easily end up knocking the mobs apart, which will make it more difficult to hit everything on subsequent attacks. Third is the beacon data transmission, where the goal is to protect a transmitter until it reaches 100%. You do not have to kill all of the wanderers in this type of encounter, you just need to complete the data transmission. But the bar only progresses if you are standing within the field and no enemies are on it. If you step off of it, the progression decreases. If there is an enemy in the ring with you, the progression decreases. If you are not in the ring but an enemy is in it, the progression decreases. You get the picture. The most straightforward strategy is long-range DPS like firearm, simply because you need to be in the ring and some enemies will be too far to hit with melee weapons. Firearm in particular is useful because it can knock enemies out of the ring with its charge charged basic attack, allowing the transmission to increase. Alternatively, pro tip, just don't attack anything until they come into the ring. If you don't hit any enemies, they will aggro onto your companion only. Some might still wander into the ring eventually, in which case use a claymore because you can kill things quickly and knock them out backwards. Next is destroy the protocore pillars. These pillars summon wanderers, so prioritize eliminating them over the mobs. My recommendation here is to maximize your single target DPS, so claymore is best, or firearm if you're not as comfortable with melee dodging. The pillars do big AoE damage to wanderers when they're destroyed, so just focus your main damage on the pillar and do splash AoE to the mobs. We also have protect the energy stabilizers or anchors. Similar to the aforementioned, there is a pillar with an HP bar, but instead of taking damage from you, it takes damage from wanderers. So the goal here is to kill all wanderers before they can destroy your pillar. I've also seen mobs typically spawn in multiple areas of the map for this encounter, and they will aggro onto the pillar. So one strategy here is to use a melee weapon like claymore, wait until they clump around the pillar, and then attack. Claymores have control effects from the charge basic attack, so even though they're so close to the pillar, you don't have to worry that much about it crumbling because you are knocking the mobs back so often. Alternatively, you can also use wand and make sure anytime you use your active skill, you've grouped up the enemies. Next is this live long and prosper mode, where you basically just need to survive for the whole duration of the timer. The star rating you'll get depends on how much HP you have left. Note that once your HP is gone, even if you heal up, you won't regain the star rating. Wand is best for this because of the healing. You recover HP and it's long range, so you can kite indefinitely with your dodges. You're at lower risk of getting hit, and you can do AoE damage. Last but not least, Frenzy. Frenzy stages will spawn a mob, usually a little while after the encounter has begun. This wanderer has Frenzy, as indicated by this icon on its buff bar, and if you kill it before it dissipates, you can take its Frenzy, which gives you an attack bonus. For this, you want to take note of where the frenzied mob spawns and get to that location right before it appears. My recommendation for these encounters is Claymore because of its burst damage. You have such a short window to do a lot of damage, so Claymore is best. For which companions to take on each of these encounters, generally Xavier Evil Police, Zane Medic of the Arctic, and Raphael Fresh Paint are best because they do the most damage and have AoE attacks. For now, for easy reference, here is a graphic outlining my recommended combinations for each encounter, assuming you have a reasonable loadout. Speaking of loadouts, your setup consists of 4 primary components: your memories, the protocores you can slot onto those memories, your weapon, and your companion. I do want to call out that this isn't a game where min-maxing your build is necessary. While yes, the 5-star level 80 max core level loadouts are theoretically going to be the best from a numbers perspective, the combat requirements in this game are forgiving and you can still be very effective with lower level combinations. For each encounter, the game provides a recommended memory level. So for example, in this fight, if your memories are at this level, you can expect to be able to beat the challenge. In my experience, once you get the hang of combat, it is totally possible to comfortably beat challenges with a pretty underleveled loadout. You can use a mix of 3, 4, 5-star memories that are 10 levels lower than the recommended and still beat the stage. You may not clear the stage with 3 stars, but it is possible to clear. But you do need to stop auto-battling if you're using a significantly underpowered loadout. If you are using the auto-battle feature, that is completely fine and totally valid. Just note that auto-battling is not optimized for victories. The AI is just not great. For memories, the most important is to fulfill the protofield stalactrum requirements by matching the stalactrums to your memories as much as possible. Doing so will grant you perfect match, which will allow your resonance skill to break 2 protocore shield layers in a single strike instead of just 1, and increase your damage during the enemy's weakness window by 100%. You'll also receive an extra attribute bonus for each matching stalactrum, which increases damage and reduces incoming damage by 5%. In other words, you'll be able to break shields faster and do more damage. Additionally, utilize matching solar memory pairs if possible, since these provide valuable pair bonuses. Memories will have a memory pair indicator above the rank up button, and you can also easily distinguish the pairs by matching the designated letters on your loadout. If you have higher level solar memories that are not solar pairs, and they also match the stalactrum requirements, it is sometimes worth the trade-off to take those instead. For protocores, there are 4 types you can equip onto your memories. Alpha protocores are diamond-shaped, beta ones are cubes, gammas are spiky, and deltas are pyramids. Each one has their own designated main or primary attribute, plus up to 4 secondary attributes that vary randomly. Solar alpha diamonds main HP, solar beta cubes can main attack, energy recovery, oath strength, and defense as the main stat. Lunar gamma spikes main attack, lunar delta pyramids can main attack, crit damage, crit rate, damage boost to weakened, defense, and HP. Higher rarity protocors will also have higher base stats. You can tell the rarity based on the colored bar beneath the protocor's icon and via its glow in the memory pages. You can further boost these stats by enhancing the protocors. Each enhanced level will boost the main stat, but every third level will boost a random secondary attribute, or if it didn't already have the full 4, add another attribute. Blue is rare with an enhanced level cap of +9, purple is super rare with an enhanced level cap of +12, yellow is super rare, which has an enhanced level cap of +15. Ideally, you should prioritize enhancing the super rare protocors with stats that boost your damage, such as Oath Recovery, damage boost to weakened enemies, attack, things like that. Stats with HP and defense are not very impactful because most of the encounters require you to eliminate wanderers. There are a few where you just have to survive through the whole encounter and don't have to kill anything, but as Zane says, the best defense is the best offense. You'll get much greater returns by focusing on damage. The color of the protocor also has to match the stalactrum of the memory in order to be equipped. Give your best ones to your strongest solar memory / solar pairs using the highest rarity and stats you have. For your weapons, you have 4 types to choose from, all with different skills. Again, I'm just covering the free-to-play ones for this video. The 4 are Firearm, which focuses on sustained single target DPS, Sword, which offers sustained melee DPS, Wand, which provides AoE damage and heals, and Claymore, which has burst DPS, damage reduction, and resistance against interrupts. In order of difficulty, Firearm is the easiest, followed by Wand, Sword, and then Claymore. In terms of baseline single target damage, Wand does the least, followed by Firearm, then Sword, provided you never get hit and can maintain 10 stacks of Hunter's Intention for that 14% damage buff at all times, and then Claymore. In terms of AoE damage, I would rank them as Firearm having the lowest, followed by Sword. Claymore is best on encounters with 3 or less mobs. Wand edges it out the more enemies there are. This is because its range allows you to group mobs together more efficiently, and it has AoEs on its basic attack, charged basic attack, and active skill. To do the most damage on Claymore, you should be using the charged basic attack, but this skill has a knockback that can split up your targets with poor positioning. This makes it harder to reliably hit all the mobs at once. So it's good if there's 3 or less enemies, but Wand is best for 4 or more, in my opinion. There are more specific ways to get the most out of each weapon, which I'll cover more in depth in my next video, but the optimal order of skills is more or less the same for all. I'm going to distinguish between 2 phases, the shielded phase and the burst phase. For the shielded phase, this is when the enemy has all of its protocor layers. Your priority should always be to get these down first. Open with your resonance skill as soon as they're attackable, use your companion support skill, as well as spam your basic attack or basic charged attack depending on the weapon until your resonance skill is off cooldown again. The objective here is to stack all of your buffs and do sustained damage until the enemy's protocor shield is completely down. So if you're using Sword, this means getting 10 stacks of Hunter's Intention for that 14% damage buff. For Claymore, this means getting 3 stacks of Gathering, again for that damage buff, and so you can use your active skill without charging it. The burst phase is when the shield is down and the enemy is weakened. This only lasts for 10 seconds, so this is when you should unload as much DPS as possible. For this, use your resonance skill a second time to break the shield. You also should only be using your Ardent Oath skill and active skill during the burst phase. If you're using Claymore, use Ardent Oath first because 3 stacks of Gathering gives a damage buff, but your active skill consumes all the stacks. So the order should be Ardent Oath, 2 to 3 basic charged attacks, followed by your active skill right before the burst phase ends. If you're using a Firearm, use your active skill first because it increases the chance of additional damage by 80% while increasing attack speed by 16% for 6 seconds. So the order should be active skill, Ardent Oath, and then spam your basic attack. If you're using Sword or Wand, it doesn't really matter if you're using Ardent Oath or your active skill first, as long as you're only using them during the burst window. Now that we've gone through the basics, some additional tips, tricks, and reminders. If you've already maxed out your loadout and can't upgrade anything else, you can squeeze out more damage through 4 primary ways in combat: positioning, dodging, buffing, and resource optimizing. First is positioning. In a lot of battles, you'll be facing waves of enemies, such as in this level where multiple mobs spawn in the center. Instead of running straight into the middle, I want you to run to the side so the enemies are essentially in a line in front of you. Some mobs do not clump up well because they teleport or roll around, so you may have to run to a far edge of the map a few times during the fight to regroup enemies. A lot of enemies also only have attacks that hit in front of them, so if you're using a melee weapon, do your best to stick to its backside. This reduces the chances of you getting hit or interrupted and increases your chances of you landing your skills. Next is dodging. The best defense is to not get hit at all, and learning to dodge well is going to be very helpful, especially especially since perfect dodges empower your companion's support skill, but it may take some practice. As Raphael says, dodging is also an art. The dodging in this game is extremely fast and forgiving. Use this to your advantage to give yourself a boost of speed, such as when running into the arena and the timer is already ticking down, you're buying yourself a few extra seconds to complete the level that way, collecting love letters when fighting Heartbreaker, evading a giant AoE attack, and general repositioning. Third is resource optimizing. As you know, your character's special weapon skills require star charges. You begin each encounter with 3, and once used, they recharge over time. So I like to start each fight by using my resonance skill. Note, in encounters with waves of enemies, there may not be enemies with a protocore shield that spawns right away, or at all. Sometimes they show up in a subsequent wave, but if it's a single enemy battle, it's pretty safe to open up with your resonance skill. The reason why we should do this is because our stars aren't recharging when they're full, and we want to get the shield down ASAP because that's when we'll be able to do the most damage. Just make sure the enemy is attackable before you use your resonance skill, because otherwise you'll still spend the star charges, but the attack won't hit. Some enemies also have invulnerable windows where their protocore shields are locked and you will not be able to remove them, so wait until all of that is done. Always prioritize spending your star charges on getting the enemy's shield down first. Only then should you be using your active skills. Lastly, buffing. Essentially, you want to stack as many damage modifiers as you can and make sure your big attacks are off cooldown right before breaking the last layer of the enemy's protocore shield. Also, take note of your Ardent Oath recharge. If it needs a few extra seconds to finish charging, wait until it's about to be ready before using your resonance skill to get that last shield layer off. You don't want to be in a position where it comes off cooldown right after you've ended your burst phase, because then you'll have to wait a while before you can burst again and finally use your Ardent Oath. In higher level encounters, you will have enough time to use Ardent Oath more than once, so you don't want it sitting there for that 30 seconds or however long and not be on recharge. Play with your game sound on. There are a lot of audio cues that indicate when Ardent Oath is ready, when an enemy is about to attack, etc. Often, players respond to audio cues faster than visual ones. Your companions will also say very specific lines when specific things happen. You can check what he says and when by tapping this with him heart icon, then going to collections, then favorites, then the battle voice tab. For example, Zane says,
"Seize this chance,"
when your Ardent Oath is ready to be used. Next, if you're having trouble beating an encounter, watch the auto battle. Take note of where things spawn and what the attack animations are. It can be easier to notice these things when you're not actively fighting in the battle yourself. And this may be an obvious one, but getting hit significantly tanks your DPS. Yes, your companion can port to you to block the hit, but even that locks you out of doing damage for a couple of seconds. Getting hit also interrupts your attack chain, it can remove your damage buff like in the case with Sword, and chip off your star rating on encounters where you have to survive with 90% HP, so it's best to be proactive with your dodges. Also, make sure you're not interrupting your companion's support skill. If you tap it and then immediately use your resonance skill or Ardent Oath, it will cancel the effects of the skill, but still put it on cooldown. Lastly, have fun. Combat is not that serious in this game. Go at your own pace and enjoy spending quality time with your man. And that's it for this guide. I hope it was helpful, but if there's anything I missed or any questions you may have, feel free to drop in the comments and I will do my best to answer. As mentioned, I'll also be posting dedicated weapons and companion guides next, so please keep an eye out for those. In the meantime, enjoy the combat in Love and Deepspace and let me know if you like this type of action in video games. I personally really like it because the weapons are very satisfying to use and I like how our player character is actually competent and fearless. The animations are crisp and beautiful, and from a roleplay standpoint, I also love how our companion comes to defend us if we're about to take a major hit. As always, I'd be honored if you subscribe if you like my vibe, and or leave a like if you enjoyed this video, as it really does help my channel as a small creator. Till the next one!